Okay, so another talk about fear. It's a little bit cold in the field today, so it's good to get a little bit of energy going. So yesterday we had a brilliant talk by Maitri Siddhi focusing on the dynamics of fear and anxiety. And today we're going to all sort of mainly focus about fear in society, sort of external fear. There's an internal dynamics of fear that Maitri Siddhi, so beautifully explained yesterday. And then there's also sort of what we do with our fear, and particularly in relation to external events. So it's good to look at where Buddhism can help us deal with our own fear, our own personal fears, and also how we deal with fear coming from external events in society. Yesterday, Maitri Siddhi evoked this symbol of the begging bowl, and Karen Adi picked up on it in the puja as well. Very, very rich symbolism, the begging bowl. And Maitri Siddhi was talking about accepting whatever comes into your begging bowl. There's another part to the symbolism of the begging bowl, which is that the Buddha was very radical in his approach to where he went with his begging bowl. So Dr. Ambedkar made this point that usually if you have an enlightened being or a sadhu or some holy man in ancient India, presumably holy woman, they would wait for people to come to them. But the Buddha got up and walked. He walked out of gratitude to his old friends in that sort of spiritual search, that truth seeking that he had. He walked all the way from Bodh Gaya to Sarnath, which I've only ever done by car. It took 4 hours on a dual carriageway on the wrong side. And for some reason, everyone had put me in the front. Anyway, that was an exercise in fear and fearlessness. But so he walked a long way, and it was a very strong principle of the Buddha and the Buddha's followers that they would beg from any household. So that doesn't matter what caste someone was from, what background, what social economic position they came from. You would beg, you would do your alms round through any household, and you would go out silently and with a great deal of presence walk amongst the people. So in a way, yes, you're accepting anything that came in your begging bowl, but accepting anything that came in your begging bowl was a revolutionary act, and it still is. The Buddha was a social revolutionary, and it was the Dharma revolution. So fear and fearlessness is particularly relevant, I think, at the moment. There's a lot to be frightened about. That's how we feel. There is a lot to be frightened about. There's environmental destruction. There are wars. There's a sort of strain on multilateralism. So multilateralism is when nations come together to put in place agreements about government policies and about how we will behave in the world that focuses on a common humanity and tries to raise the standard of living for everyone and prevent war. It's particularly important when you have things like pandemics, but it also includes agreements about wars and conflict. And there's a great strain on all of those multilateral agreements that were put in place largely after the Second World War to prevent another world war happening. There's a rise in living costs, and there's social polarisation exacerbated by social media. So as we're sitting here, there are two big protests in London. One is for Unite the Kingdom, which one might describe as a far-right march, and the other as a pro-Palestinian march. And 4,000 police officers have been deployed with armed vehicles and facial recognition drones. So just check in with your nervous system as I say that, because this is something that we don't want to see. We don't want to see this. And can be very painfully felt by many of us. It feels like a particularly charged time, and a time when there seems to be a lack of accountability for humanity as one. Now, some people are much more sensitive to this than others. I am the child of journalists, quite a long line of journalists. Both my parents are journalists. I grew up with a very strong awareness of what was happening in the news. My family, extended family, took me to a Palestinian refugee camp in Syria when I was 14, and that had a very, very big effect on my psyche. And even before that, when I was 10, I was very affected by a disaster called the Zeebrugge disaster, where a ferry left its doors open and everyone drowned. And I stood at the TV, and my father came to get me for breakfast, and I couldn't leave watching the news. And I realised at that moment that my life could not ignore the suffering of others. So I thought it was impossible for me at that moment to just go and have my breakfast and carry on as normal, when I knew that all these families' lives had fallen apart, for relatives and friends. And it was a very, very strong experience for me. And anyway, at that time I vowed to become a Catholic nun. That didn't quite work out. I was a little too naughty. Anyway. So I think what happens is, I was talking about this in the College Chairs Council, where I'm a part of, which is a sort of, it's some of the people who are involved in some of the bodies in the movement that are kind of worldwide, looking at the overview of the movement. And I brought to the table, I'm also a bit of a catastrophist by nature and a pessimist. That's why it's so good that I'm friends with Karen Adi. Apparently together we make one normal person. Anyway, she keeps me on track. But yes, so I brought to the College Chairs Council, should we do a risk assessment for big societal change? Just as you might do a risk assessment for a pandemic or a risk assessment for anything else. Should we do a risk assessment for extreme societal change? First of all, everyone laughed at me and teased me. That's fine. Second of all, they said, "I'm really relieved that you said that." And when I've talked to other people about it as well, they've said, "I'm really relieved that you've said that." Now, no one knows what's going to happen in the future, and luckily it doesn't turn out the way I usually think it's going to turn out, given my pessimistic mind. But I do think it is worth looking as a movement at what we can contribute in an unsettled world. The Buddha talked about the vanity of youth, health and life. And he said, when other people see old age, sickness and death, they're shocked and humiliated and disgusted. But I realised that I was going to grow old, I was going to get sick, and at one time I was going to die. And it didn't befit me to be shocked, humiliated and disgusted. And he said the vanity of health, youth and life entirely left him. Now I think there's another vanity in there, which is the vanity of a secure society. And I think for some people, even from quite early on, that vanity is starting to leave them, or at least being undermined. Bhante talked about the myth of progress, and Maitri Siddhi talked about that yesterday. The myth of progress that he attributed it actually to a Christian and Marxist way of thinking, which is that there's inevitable progression in society, and that's informed a lot of our education system. So one of the things that my father did, my father is a man of great integrity, and he, I remember, I'll never forget it, he stood at this top of the stairs with tears pouring down his face, and he said to me, everything I've ever fought for in my life is being destroyed. Women's rights, minority rights, racial, moving against racial discrimination, all those things. The truth itself, he's the old school journalist that got into journalism so he could tell the truth. He said, it's all being undermined. And I thought I'd leave a better world for my children and my grandchildren, and I'm not sure that I have. What can you say to that? What can you say to that? I still don't quite know what to say to my father. He says, even for him now, sometimes he doesn't read the newspapers. He can't bear it. So for some people, that's quite a relevant and ongoing concern, and we feel it deeply more than others. But we are communal beings, and we live in a communal context, and what happens to some affects us all. And Bhante understood this. He gives a very interesting comment in, you can find it in the complete works. I'm not entirely familiar what is in all these complete works. I haven't read them. Unlike Prajnagita, I haven't read them from beginning to end. But it's in the Bodhisattva Ideal volume. It was called the Bodhisattva Ideal. He talks about George Roerich, who was a Russian Tibetanologist. George Roerich going to the US and talking about this sense of fear that he encountered in the West, in the US actually, in the United States, talking about this sense of palpable fear, which you can feel sometimes yourselves. And Bhante said this about it. He said, the sense of worry and insecurity is one of the defining features of our age, aptly called the age of anxiety. That was Alan Watts in the 1950s. In the midst of this cloud, this darkness at noon, people live and work and try to breathe. People have little confidence in one another, little confidence in life itself, and certainly little confidence in themselves. So I'm going to focus on those three things in this talk. Little confidence in one another, little confidence in life itself, and certainly little confidence in themselves. Because I think that's the sort of key to undoing fear in society, more like having an appropriate response to fear in society. But first let's ask this question, is it any worse than before? I've got this feeling, there's this kind of terror awaiting me, but is it any worse than before? Isn't this just what society does? What Maitri Siddhi was saying, there's sort of cycles in society, cycles of kind of growth and peace, and then cycles of war and destruction. And also Maitri Siddhi mentioned yesterday the time of the Buddha was also a time of unrest. The Buddha was well acquainted with war. It was a time when smaller kingdoms or republics were being amalgamated into bigger kingdoms. A central character all of this was King Ajatasattu of Magadha, who invaded Kosala under King Pasenadi. King Pasenadi was a great friend of the Buddha's. They were the same age. I was saying the other day, there's a lot in what the Buddha said to kings, his sort of political advice, as it were, and his relationship with kings. And I said, I'd really like to give a talk on that one day. And then someone pointed out to me that I already had, that I had actually completely forgotten. So maybe it's time I re-looked at that material. And of course we know that I think it's the next king of Kosala, not King Pasenadi certainly, he absorbed the Republic of the Shakyans, which was the Buddha's own tribe. It's said that he killed them all, but I doubt that's 100% true. I think, but there obviously was a great violence was committed against the Shakyan people, who were peace-loving people, sons and daughters of the Buddha, and didn't fight back, as the story goes. So yes, the Buddha was acquainted with war and strife. He stopped a war between the Shakyans and the Kolyas, over the Rohini River, which Bhante talks about in Buddhism, World Peace and Nuclear War. He clearly felt it. He felt that kind of struggle between people. He talked about how the victim becomes the conqueror and the conqueror becomes the victim. He talked about in the Atadanda Sutta, fear is born from arming oneself. Just see how many people fight. Let me tell you about the terror that caused me to shake all over. And as we heard yesterday, he compared it to a pond drying out and fish struggling. This kind of competition for resources. And amongst all of that, he talks about the fourth sight. Now, for accuracy, in the Pali Canon, the fourth sight is actually attributed to a previous Buddha. It's not the Buddha Shakyamuni, but in the later traditions, it becomes attributed to Shakyamuni Buddha. Anyway, he talked about it. It obviously moved him when he talked about it, or it moves me when he talks about it. So you remember that he has this sight of a mendicant, of a wandering holy person. And on the basis of that sight, he enters the spiritual quest, and he goes forth from his palatial life. But the description of the fourth sight is very interesting. He describes the wandering holy person as one who truly follows Dharma, who lives in serenity, performs skillful actions, performs meritorious deeds, is without violence, ahimsa, without violence, and truly has compassion for living beings. Compassion here is anukampa. He has a shaking with the life of all beings. And one who truly follows Dharma is Dharmachari or Dharmacharini. And I think this is, for me, is a description in the Pali Canon of what an order member can be. So I'm going to read it again, but this is what we can be as order members. This is what we're training to be as order members. One who truly follows Dharma, a Dharmacharini, who lives in serenity, performs skillful actions, performs meritorious deeds, is without violence, and truly has compassion, who shakes, literally shakes, with sensitivity to life itself and other living beings. Yeah. One who truly follows Dharma, who lives in serenity, performs skillful actions, performs meritorious deeds, is without violence, and truly has compassion for living beings. I can put it up on the notice board, actually. And for the geeks amongst you, I can put it up in Pali as well. This has been very, very important to me in my own life, the search for ahimsa. The search for ahimsa. What is true non-violence? What is deep non-violence? I think that's my whole mythic search. Now, Bhante also felt this. He also felt what was happening in society very deeply. He makes a very interesting comment about his contact with Dr. Ambedkar, who's the greatest, really the greatest Buddhist social activist there's been after Emperor Ashoka, really. I would say. You can arm wrestle with me about it if you've got someone else to suggest. After my contact with Dr. Ambedkar, I became much more aware of the social dimension of Buddhism, in fact, the social dimension of existence itself. Very strong thing to say. Through Dr. Ambedkar, Bhante became aware of the social dimension of existence itself. And there's a lot of work that he did with this, a lot of lectures that he gave. Currently, my favourite or my most visited editions of the complete works are A New Buddhist Movement 1 and 2. Absolutely fascinating. I really recommend that you read that in your spare time or listen to the talks. And if I was going to sort of point you in certain directions, I would, perhaps I would start in 1976 with the talks on the lectures that Bhante gave in one of my favourite buildings, the Brighton Pavilion. he gave a talk on Blueprint for a New World, which was, amongst other, there's a series of 4 lectures, but the last was a Blueprint for a New World. And in that talk, he talked about, well, literally a blueprint for a new world coming into being, growing out of a nucleus of a new society. And that nucleus of the new society was the Sangha and the order itself. So that the new world would grow out of this nucleus of very positive, aware individuals. He compared it to a garden in the wilderness. I really love this garden in the wilderness idea, because I'm a very urban creature. I've realised this after 15 years of living in Wales. And one of the things that's really delighted me is wandering around the streets of Brixton, which is near, I grew up around South London, but what I've noticed is that spontaneously there's little gardens growing up in neighbourhoods. This is a new development. It did not happen in the 80s when I grew up. But little gardens, and people are taking it upon themselves to have these really nice little gardens. And so far as I've seen, actually someone did steal my mother's pot plant that I put out for her the other day, which I'm a little bit upset about. But no one seems to have stolen these gardens. And there's little benches, and they're all brightly painted, and people are kind of hanging out there. Yeah, it's fantastic, wonderful. Little gardens in the wilderness, places where people can come together and talk and hang out. In 1984, he talked about Buddhism, world peace and nuclear war. Absolutely seminal talk on, well, there's so much in it I couldn't possibly summarise it, but he talked about the need for examples of sanity and compassion in the world. He talked about the need to see humanity as one. And he talked about a vision beyond even creating world peace, beyond even creating a better society, beyond even life and death, which is the vision of liberation, the vision of nirvana. And there's a very interesting talk going back in time called Evolution or Extinction, Current World Problems. And that's all on Free Buddhist Audio. And that's the one I want to focus on, because this is what's taken my interest recently. But he says something very interesting at the beginning. He says, speaking tonight on this subject of current world problems from a Buddhist point of view, I'm not in fact dealing with something which is to me, as it were, academic or peripheral interest, or even of just general interest. In a sense, I'm trying to make clear through this lecture the sort of raison d'etre of my own existence, as it were, as a practical working Buddhist, not just a Buddhist inwardly in faith and conviction, but so far as outward activities are also concerned. So that's a very strong thing of Bhante to say. I couldn't believe it. I had to rewind, which means going back to the beginning of the track nowadays. So he's saying that fundamental to his own existence as a Buddhist was a Buddhist response to current world problems. Actually, just fundamental to his own existence at all. His own raison d'etre, the reason for his life, was a response to current world problems. Very, very powerful thing to say, and Bhante didn't say things lightly. And then he goes on to say it's not enough just to say Buddhism is the answer. He said you can have these great big speeches where you talk about the problems in society, and then you say everyone needs to become a Buddhist and then we'll all be okay. And then actually doesn't really change anything, and everyone goes on exactly the same as they were before. We don't need to take that approach, I think. Dr. Ambedkar had shown them that we are part of society, and what happens in society happens to us. And also what we are, who we are, how we practice, what we do has an effect on society. It also works the other way round. And Buddhism can be part of that, what we sometimes call the Dharma revolution. But not Buddhism as a surface interest. Buddhism as what we outwardly do as Buddhists. Now, if I'm going to summarise very briefly what Bhante thought the problem was, Bhante thought the problem was primarily the role of the negative group. He says there's always been social unrest, there's always been wars and conflict, but now it's global rather than local. That's the big difference. We know what's happening over in Gaza. We know what's happening over in Iran, as much as we can tell through the internet blackout. We know what's happening in Sudan, just to name a few places. And also the forces that affect us are now global rather than local. There's global forces that we're aware of, but we feel powerless to change. And yet they affect us. And that's a very difficult position to be in. You've got these global forces, but you can't do anything about it as individuals. And I think that's true now more than ever, now more than in 1971. 1% of the population own 95% of the world's resources. That's quite a shocking statistic. And what we've got is individuals, these sort of ultra-rich individuals that control vast corporations that use their resources to gain political influence and shape policies. They're using their influence to shape policies that affect us all. We've really seen this with the war in Iran. So even into our level of Taraloka project, we're having to look at the case that our costs have pretty much doubled. Because of the war in Iran and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. So you never thought that the Taraloka Unlimited project was going to be limited by the Strait of Hormuz. Who'd actually heard of the Strait of Hormuz last year? You had, in shipping, along with my brother, also in shipping. My brother always says you can tell a lot about what's happening with the world by what gets shipped around it. So yes, there's a competition for resources. We have a system that's dependent on oil and we're past peak oil production. And Bhante's point is, I mean, sort of putting it into modern terms, but in this kind of global oligarchy, is what Oxfam describe it as, in this kind of global oligarchy. And I'm sure I'm making it far too simplistic. But in this kind of global oligarchy, what we've got is it's subsuming the development of the individual. The development of the individual as Bhante understands it, which is people becoming creative, independent and emotionally positive and aware. It's limiting the capacity for those individuals to develop. So if you go back to that image of the fourth sight, it's very, in the Buddha's day, it was quite, the society or culture enabled people to go forth, enabled people to live a wandering holy life, and enable people to become dharmacharis and dharmacharinis in those terms. It's much, much more difficult now. And that's partly because of this kind of globalization and the force of a negative group. In 1979, I am there. Ooh, got really good. In 1979, Bhante gave a fantastic talk, another really seminal talk. I'm hoping you're all going to go and listen to these. It just like would make my day if you did. In 1979, he talked about Padmasambhava as the second Buddha, the guru, who comes after the Buddha to take forward his work. And he takes forward the work of the Buddha by going deeper into the forces of the collective psyche, to tame the consciousness of humanity or the world. Padmasambhava, come and tame the consciousness of humanity and the world. You know, go to London today and sort it out. So you've got the image of the Buddha wandering, talking to people, teaching them the Dharma. Very serene image. You know, you've got the image of the Buddha and that mad elephant enveloping the elephant with loving kindness. And you've got the image of Padmasambhava in the cremation ground of modern life, with his back against the stupa and all the forces whirling around him. The demons, the demonesses, the darkanies, all these forces whirling around him, and him totally solid with his back against the stupa. And I think about Bhante wandering around the UK, you know, when he first got here in the 1960s. When he talks about that image of Padmasambhava, he talks about going to the city of London when he first came back. And he was with a friend and he saw all these banks and the skyscrapers and big businesses. They're even bigger now than they were in the 60s. And he said to his friend, this is what we're up against. Because this is one of the demons, this money, this sort of form of power, which, as it were, has got out of control of the spiritual principle. Power has got out of control. Money and power have got out of control of the spiritual principle. And he saw that how people, when they saw the news, they get quite indignant. You know, you really feel it, you get indignant. You even, as Karen Adi was talking about very eloquently, I thought, last night, in her own experience, you can want to fight. You know, the fighter comes out. It does for me anyway. And then what happens is you don't know quite what to do or how to change anything, and you go into despondency and helplessness. There's a revolution in being of, not a good revolution, let's talk about it in another way. There's a cycle of being of idealism and despondency. I feel very, very subject to that myself. And I went to see Bhante about it once, and he said to me, well, actually I wrote to Bhante about it, and he wrote back to me and he said, remember the story of Sona. I couldn't remember the story of Sona, so I had to look it up. The story of Sona is someone who was a lute player. Do you remember this? And he does the walking meditation and his feet start to bleed. And the Buddha says to him, what were you before you were a monk? He said, I was a lute player. He said, well, when did you get the best sound? Was it when the strings are too tight or when they're too slack? He said, oh, it's when they're just right, you know, neither too slack, neither too tight. He says, so it is with the spiritual life. Regular effort, regular, consistent effort, 1 foot forward. So let's go back to the Bodhisattva ideal. Bhante says he thinks the problem is, and the problem of this kind of cycle between idealism and despondency, is that people have little confidence in one another, little confidence in life itself, and certainly little confidence in themselves. Confidence, shraddha, saddha. Faith. Faith in what? I think it's faith primarily in creativity, the possibility of creativity, the possibility of hope. I think that's what we've lost confidence. In a way, we've lost confidence that there is, in fact, a spiral path. So what would it be like to have confidence in each other, in life and in ourselves? What could we do if we did have confidence in ourselves, in each other and in life? So Bhante gives, in his talk, Evolution or Extinction, he gives 4 very practical things that we could do. And I want to finish by focusing on those practical things. So now you've all got a little bit hot, your nervous system have activated, I've just told you about terrible things of the world. What are we going to do about it? So the first thing is having confidence in ourselves. And Bhante talks about this in his talk, Evolution or Extinction. He talks about this as self-development. So it's not improvement. You know, there's a lot on... I'm now, I hate to say it, a middle-aged woman. And my Instagram scrolling, whatever, algorithm knows that. And I'm really fascinated by all the ways that it tells me I could improve myself. I actually did download the nervous system reset, vagus nerve system, 5 minutes a day was just quite interested to see what they did on that. Anyway, it did work for a while, that 5 minutes. Yes, so there's a kind of constant message on how you can improve yourself, either your looks, your health, your language skills, how to be more articulate in social situations. Bhante wasn't quite talking about those kind of things, just to let you know. He was talking about raising consciousness to ever higher levels of awareness. Raising consciousness to ever higher levels of awareness. So going back to the Atadanda Sutta, what the Buddha said is he saw, seeing people locked in conflict, I was repelled. Sometimes that translation is I was disgusted. But then I discerned here a thorn hard to see, lodged deep in the heart. It's only when pierced by this thorn that one runs in all directions. So if that thorn is taken out, the running is finished, and so the exhaustion that comes with it. I call this craving the greed, the great flood. It is a whirlpool sucking one down, a constant yearning seeking a hold, continually in movement, difficult to cross in the mire of sensual desire, but the stage stands on solid ground, never moving from the truth, and when they have completely renounced, then indeed they are calm. Very beautiful images. You've got this kind of whirlpool, this whirlpool of a great flood, sucking you down, a kind of constant yearning, continually in movement, and then the sage stands calm, never moving from the truth. Well, that would be something, wouldn't it? Never moving from the truth. That's the kind of thing Bhante has in mind when he talks about self-development. It's a training in calm. He says if you're not trying to develop yourself, you're not making any contribution at all, really. However externally active you may be to the ultimate solution of current world problems, neither, of course, are you really doing anything for yourself. Thanks, Bhante. Being in a state of horrified anxiety and polarisation won't help, no matter how tempting it is. I do think there's a temptation of being in that state of horrified anxiety and social polarisation. It gives you a sense of sort of me, against the world. But it doesn't help you and it doesn't help the world. Actually, we have the tools that we need in order to face fear in ourselves and face fear in society, and to help give the gift of fearlessness to others. We have meditation, and also, and this is what Bhante said, he said you need meditation, but you need a life that supports meditation. It's not just enough to do, what I call maintenance meditation, 20 minutes a day. I'm afraid to say, you're all in the ordination process. It's time I told you. Unless there's some compelling reason why you can't meditate for longer, try and go beyond maintenance. Try and go into a life that supports your meditation practice, whatever that is in your conditions, and a meditation that actually starts developing after maintenance. Because what meditation does is it gives you what we famously call the gap between feeling tone and craving, aversion or ignorance. It gives you that space, it gives you that gap to respond creatively to whatever comes in your begging bowl, to use that analogy. We have the ability, through our spiritual practice, to feel the very things we're frightened of and never move from the truth. I love that image, never move from the truth. We've got the capacity to experience, for example, loneliness, or fear of violence, or fear of separation and alienation. We've got the capacity to feel those things deeply, to feel the dukkha of it, and then respond creatively. And I've really seen this. I'll share two incidents in my own life that have been very important to me. One of them is about external sort of frightening conditions, and one of them is internal. Maybe I'll start with the external. So I was, shall we say, not in secure housing in the 90s in South London, when there were lots of squats in South London at that time. It was legal. And I was sitting in meditation, and someone started to break into our house. A group of men started to break into our house to take it over. And at that point, I didn't know whether they were armed or not. So that is objectively fairly terrifying. But because I was in meditation, I just had this thought, what is fear? And I could feel the adrenaline, I could feel the cortisol, I could feel my nervous system activated. In the 90s, we didn't call it an activated nervous system, but I could feel whatever it was, I could feel it. I don't think I'd ever heard fight, flight, freeze or fawn in those days. I just felt my body stimulated and activated, and I could feel the energy pulsing through it, the heart racing. I was ready for action. And I saw how that was associated, as Maitri Siddhi was saying, certain stories about what was going to happen. A sort of jump into like, this is what's going to happen. So stories around fear of what was going to happen when they came in. And weirdly, it just sort of, I slightly unhooked from the fear of it, from the stories. And when Rent a Mob did arrive in the household, I was extremely calm. And weirdly, so were all my housemates. And we explained to them patiently that we knew who had hired them, that it wasn't illegal to squat, but it is illegal to break into a property. Anyway, and then this whole farcical situation happened where the hippies in the squat were trying to get Rent a Mob to leave. Rent a Mob wanted to leave, but the person who'd hired them didn't want them to leave. And thus was a whole story. But I won't go into that. I can at some length later. Everyone was fine. Yeah. Why am I telling you all this? I hope that's not too strong. But anyway, what I want to say is that even in objectively frightening situations, one can have a awareness of fear itself and move into a creative response. The other thing I had was an internal fear. I have a great fear of loneliness. I think many people do. I think it's part of the human psyche that separates oneself off from others. And it can be, it's not just fear of being without friends, it's a fear of actually, it's a fear of being left out in the desert by the group. And, you know, it's a survival fear. It's a survival fear, sometimes a fear of loneliness. And for so much of my life, I've avoided that fear of loneliness. But I was in meditation and I just let it come. And I just let this fear of loneliness, this great wave of it, come over me. And it was a moment, and then it passed. And then I really, truly realised it was just a moment, and it could pass. And that I didn't have to live my life dictated by a fear of loneliness. And it was all right. I survived. I let it come, and I survived. Very, very significant moment. So we've got the tools, we've got that awareness tool. Maitri talked yesterday about Shraddha and about metta. I wanted to focus a little bit on that awareness, that gap between a feeling tone or even feelings, emotions, and then having a creative response. The creative mind loves where there's no reason for love, finds hope where there's no reason for hope, and in this way builds heaven in hell's despair. So Bhante says if we want to really help the world, we need to get rid of everything that it is a waste of time. All interests and activities that are a waste of time. And how many more wastes of time exist now than in 1971? I think that what he's saying here in a way is give yourself more space to have a gap between feeling and creative action. Do whatever it takes to keep you in positive mental states. So it means you've got to be aware of what is helping you maintain a positive mental state, or what's making your mental state slide. We could talk about that in our group. So, a real sensitivity to like, what is happening now in my mind? Is it helpful or not? Bhante talks about becoming a true individual. He talks about becoming our own work of art, that we create something in ourselves, something beautiful that has an effect on the world, that is significant to the world. An example of sanity and compassion in the world. We've got to train ourselves to do that. I'm very lucky in my life to have had quite a bit of contact with order members in India, and they've taught me a lot about how to manage this, how to be an individual and a creative force in society, and how to maintain that sort of standing on solid ground and never moving from the truth. Another story I have is about a dear friend, Amritdeep. I've got a lot of respect for Amritdeep. I work quite closely with him on many things, and there was a terrible time in India, and it was very difficult. It was very difficult, very difficult time for the order in many ways, and it was just post-COVID, and there was an online college meeting, or hybrid college meeting. Some of us were together, but we were going to have a Zoom meeting with the Indian public preceptors. Only the Indian public preceptors could not be found. And we were like, where are they? Keep on sort of texting, WhatsApp and whatever. Couldn't find the Indian public preceptors. Eventually they did come back, and we had a Zoom with Amritdeep, and he said, look, it's the hardest I've ever known it in my life. Really, really difficult circumstances. And sometimes I've really wondered if I can carry on. Thinking like, Amritdeep, don't say that. If you can't carry on, what hope is there for the rest of us? He said, so I decided what we needed to do was we all needed to go to Savatthi and sit at the feet of the Buddha. So, sorry guys, I just organised a retreat and we all went to Savatthi to sit at the feet of the Buddha. Now, Savatthi is in the back end of Beyond, I think it's Uttar Pradesh. It's either Uttar Pradesh or Bihar, but it's not that easy to get to, and it's not that easy to find accommodation. It's not an easy place to set up a retreat. It's also quite rough. It's a rough area. But there he was. He just got, I think, over 100 order members just to go and sit at the feet of the Buddha. That's where the Buddha spent most of his life. It's where the Buddha's Gandakuti, the fragrant chamber, was. You can still visit it, and it still smells of roses. It just smells of roses. And you just sit there in the presence of the Buddha, and you think of the Buddha walking around, and you think of what he said and what he did, and your heart fills with delight, and you know that you can take on anything. It was quite tough, even, sometimes in the team at Taraloka we've got a big project to do, and it was really the worst timing ever for the convention to be at Bodh Gaya. But Karanadi and I knew we had to go. She was on meetings every afternoon in a mosquito-infested corridor because there were various things in the project that needed it dealing with. But we knew we needed to go. We needed to go and sit at the feet of the Buddha. So in whatever way it happens, we need to sit at the feet of the Buddha. And we need to cultivate positive mental states. We need to train ourselves in calm and never move from the truth. And also have confidence that it's possible. One of the vows, or the lines of acceptance actually, that we take at ordination is we accept the ordination for the attainment of enlightenment, which means we have to believe that that's actually possible. And if not enlightenment in this lifetime, at least stream entry. And if not stream entry, at least being a substantial creative individual, a dharmacharani in the world, that we could at least be the fourth sight. Maybe that's something we could talk about in groups, whether you've got that confidence. I've got that confidence. I really do. I've based my whole life on this confidence that we can create an order of dharmacharanis, proper dharmacharanis. I'm certainly not in it for the money, I must tell you. So the other thing that we have confidence in is each other. He said, join a spiritual community. You can't do it alone. We've got to do it with each other. We've got to seek genuine spiritual exchange, real communication, a vital responsiveness based on shared principles and ideals. That means a lot, that shared responsiveness. It means we've got meaningful communication, and people are lost for meaningful communication in their lives. And that gives us the strength we need to face difficulties. I'm fairly convinced myself that in the face of huge global corporations influencing government policies, change will have to come from small communities working effectively together. And I think that's possible, and I think it's happening. We're in a position to do that because we have the basis of real communication and friendship. We have the tools. We've got the metta bhavana. We've got a path of development. We've got a way to talk to each other about what's truly meaningful to us. And when we say spiritual communities, I want to evoke something of the sheer energy that can give you. That's what powers me in my life, is the team at Taraloka. Luckily, there are some of them. I couldn't be who I am without you. I just couldn't do it. I don't think I could be. I don't know how people are public preceptors without living in a community. I really don't know how they do that. I couldn't take on all the problems that I have to face without my friends. I just couldn't do it. And sometimes you get within the spiritual community, within a chapter or a GFR group or a retreat or a class team, or however it is we come together, you get something that starts shifting your psyche and giving you the power you need to face the problems of the world and in yourselves. I've started to call this, bear with me, I started to call this the Ghana Chakra. So the Ghana Chakra is when a tantric guru like Padmasambhava, I don't know why I'm pointing there, I can feel Padmasambhava sitting there somehow, but yes, when you invite the guru like Padmasambhava, you as a community perform a collective offering called a Ghana Chakra, a great feast. And sometimes it's a temporary grouping, and sometimes there's the same people who do each Ghana Chakra, but you always do this kind of Ghana Chakra, this great feast, collective feast to invite the guru. It's very, very symbolic if you read the texts. So what I've done, I've taken one of the songs from the Ghana Chakra and I've adapted it to us because it's in such symbolic language, you'll just find it so odd that you'll think I've gone a bit loopy. So this is my re-rendering of a Ghana Chakra song, just to give you an idea of what it feels like to be in an alive spiritual community. I'm not going to sing it, luckily for you. Well, I haven't got actually a tune, but anyway. The yogini stays at the sacred place of Tara's realm. Loudly the drum sounds forth. Love is our business and not dissension. There we gobble up the flesh of fear and drink the wine of great bliss. Hey there, the true followers are come together, but the frauds are kept far away. We take the incense and the scent of the May blossoms, herbs and plant-based food we eat with relish. Going this way and that in the dance, we give no thought to what is proper or improper. Adorning our limbs with blankets, we place ourselves on the Vajra seat. Sacred union takes place at our meeting, for friendship is not rejected. Dancing with mindful movement undistracted, meditating with mind moved by great compassion, the mind uninterrupted in its concentration. Buddhas and masters in the doctrine, goddesses and yoginis, abandon pretense and to their utmost sing and dance. There comes thereby protection for the Ghana and protection for oneself. Thereby the world is reduced to subjection and all our practices are perfected by it. Decorously one sings there, decorously one dances there. The leader is first appointed, and they notice the buzzards and kites circle. The ravens and carrion crows have come. The sound of flying geese and bees are heard, and in the garden the distant sound of a white owl. I hope you just get some of the energy of those Ganachakra songs. I feel like that's what I'm in. That's how I feel on a day-to-day level. And that's why it's going to be okay. Yeah, just to come into our funny little kitchen at Ratnaloka, or come in the community here at Taraloka, you know it's possible. You just know it's possible. You see your friends and you know you can do it. Ooh. Now in this, Bhante says it's centred around, the spiritual community is centred around people who are more developed than others. In the Ganachakra, you're centred around a guru. Whatever we think of that, what we can do ourselves is make sure it's a bit like that can happen. The spiritual community can only happen if we really work on our own development as well. It's very joyful. In the ordination ceremony, we have the lines of acceptance: with loyalty to my teachers and in harmony with friends and companions, I accept this ordination. We've got a loyalty to what our teachers stand for and what we share with them, what we've said yes to in their teachings. We have fidelity to our values. We don't give up on each other. We always keep the door open to each other, even if it's difficult. And we cultivate harmony, which isn't just agreeing with each other. It's not just what Denise Levertov says is a shrinking to opposites. Harmony isn't a shrinking. It's about a responsiveness to other people in our lives and a work to sustain harmony. And we're willing to do that work. You know, sometimes I have a moment and I ask myself, am I willing to restore harmony? But I am willing, because it's important. We've got to weather the storm together. We've got to weather the circling of the birds of prey and the birds who feast on death. We're linked to each other. We're linked to each other in ways that it's hard to know, but it runs very, very deep. It runs deep in our lives and it runs deep in our death. Sometimes we feel that, well, if someone dies in the order or the movement, sometimes we feel like that if we haven't seen someone for a long time and we welcome them. Those connections run deep. So the other thing he says join the spiritual community, but he also says withdraw from negative groups or the anti-spiritual forces. Divest from groups that stifle the development of the individual. And as much as you can, lead a simple life, which means a whole life, a whole committed life, which has one purpose in mind. And it will involve renunciation. There's so many corporations vying for our attention. And I don't know if some of you saw that documentary on social media, but it had this line in it: if the product is free, you are the product. There's a lot of people making money out of your overstimulated nervous system. Particularly on social media. I think if you succumb to that. I was looking at a study actually just about sleep, and sleep has gone down over all age groups, but particularly people in between 16 and 24. And I think partly this is due to a dysregulated nervous system. My algorithm on Instagram, I wish I didn't look at it actually at all, but anyway, my Instagram algorithm has constantly gives me movie scenes of sexual violence towards women, and they know that my algorithm, I'll see it and be shocked, and I'll pay a little bit more attention to that movie scene, because it's just stimulated my nervous system. So I must have done that once, but now it just keeps on coming. I really would rather the menopausal belly fat adverts than that. But I think, well, if that's happening to me, what's happening to lots and lots of people? The algorithm knows where it's got you, and it's got you when your nervous system is deregulated and you just pay a little bit more attention, and that you get addicted to do that. Interestingly, one of the biggest growth areas in modern society, retail is going down. The biggest growth area is the wellness industry, to sort of combat both these things. Retreats are therefore a radical act. They're a radical act because you turn off your phone. You leave behind your work, you leave behind social groups, you leave behind consumerism and shops, except for the wonderful Taraloka shop, which of course is virtuous and very good for ordination presents, as I'm just about to go to a Kosh of Honour. But apart from that, retreats are a radical act. Turning off your phone is a radical act, and very, very important to do. But the last thing I say is he talks about confidence in life itself. And in Evolution or Extinction, he says, exert whatever influence for good that you can. Exert whatever influence for good that you can. We don't abandon others. In the ordination ceremony, the line of acceptance is, for the sake of all beings, I accept this ordination. And confidence in life itself is the confidence that people respond to the good, and that the forces of good will be supported by reality. The reality is that in life there is the capacity for the wheel of life, for reactive tendencies and the reactive mind, but there's also the capacity for the spiral path. And that is possible in this one and same reality, just as it's possible to be reactive. Just as greed and hatred and ignorance are possible, so are love, so are wisdom, so are great contentment. So we need the confidence that people respond to the good, and that we can support the development of each other to be positive, creative individuals, and that we can support the development in the world of people to be positive, creative individuals. And we can offer them the gift of fearlessness that comes from confidence in oneself and confidence in each other. We can give the gift of positive mental states in a tumultuous world. And we can see this in Buddhist centres. We can see that we have something to offer. Taraloka has something to offer, Taraloka. All your Buddhist centres at home have something to offer to people, that they can come like a garden in the wilderness, like an oasis of calm. They can come and they can enter into something and relax. Interestingly, I'm involved in two very kind of situations that I find immensely positive and who are also in a period of growth, very rapid growth. One of them is Brixton Buddhist Centre, and one of them is Taraloka. And I've done the same ritual in both. So in Taraloka, we evoked the four kings. And the four kings are the kind of celestial celestial guardians. They're like the bouncers of the cosmos. And you evoke them when you need support in the world. They're kind of this bridge between worldly and spiritual forces. And you evoke them when you need support with fire safety strategies, money, and the Lambeth Council. So I did this in Taraloka, and we went round and we made offerings in all the four directions. In the garden, in this beautiful countryside in Wales. Very, very strong ritual. It was the time when we got the keys to the new place. And then we did the same ritual in Brixton Buddhist Centre, who were getting the leasehold for the community centre that they were renting. But they need a bit of help in a worldly sense. So we did the same ritual going around a council estate in Brixton. Which I was thinking, wow, you can't get two more opposite things than that. But the same thing arose. I was with a friend who was somewhat sceptical, shall we say, that this ritual was going to work, and had to be heavily persuaded to come. And then he said he was, sitting there, and he suddenly said, like, suddenly it was like, like the bouncers had arrived. This kind of cosmic force that protects the good and initiatives towards the good. So there is support there, and we can have confidence in that. We can have confidence that the spiral path is positive and in some weird way is protected. And we ourselves can support positive groups and initiatives, wherever we find them, both within the Sangha and without. Small communities at the heart of change. It's a bit like why I'm trustee of Future Dharma Fund. I really don't have time. I've got to tell you, I really don't have time. But it's a positive initiative in a wholesome direction. It's our garden in the wilderness, and supporting other gardens in the wilderness, wherever we find them. And in that, having confidence in life itself, that there is a possibility of understanding the way things are and of transcending, in a way, transcending this whole predicament that we're in, this wheel of life. But we've got to be realistic about it. Bhante said, you'll never have one worldwide spiritual community. It would then very rapidly become a group. But you could have a sort of network of spiritual communities which extend all over the globe, and many of the members of which are in contact with one another, which exert a sort of silent, unseen influence. You can't have the answer to world problems that everyone's going to be Buddhist, but you can have a sort of network of spiritual communities which are in contact with one another and exert a sort of silent, unseen influence. Now, he compares this to the earthworm. Quite small, but our whole lives are dependent on earthworms. And they exert a silent, unseen influence under the ground, making little channels. I was overjoyed to see the moles underneath the tent yesterday making little wriggles. Maybe we'll be like the moles instead. Or maybe we'll be like ley lines or footpaths. Love this kind of English tradition of footpaths. Some of them very, very ancient, actually. Crisscrossing, just offering people a way out. And offering confidence in ourselves, in each other, and in life itself. There is the possibility of liberation for all of us. So I'm just going to end by reading the Buddha and his sort of those initial arahants in the world, and what he said to them, Yasa and his friends. He said, I am free from all shackles, whether human or divine. You too are free from all shackles, whether human or divine. Go now and wander for the welfare and happiness of many, out of compassion for the world, for the benefit, welfare and happiness of gods and men. Teach the Dharma that is beautiful in the beginning, beautiful in the middle, and beautiful at the end, with the meaning and the letter. Explain a holy life that is utterly perfect and pure. There are beings with little dust on their eyes who will be lost through not hearing the Dharma. Some will understand.